Hi everybody, and welcome back to INTR 101, College Success Strategies. Today we're going to be talking about critical reading, which is a rough topic. Not a lot of students enjoy really deep diving into how to critically read something, but it's really important because doing the assigned readings is actually pretty critical to a lot of classes, especially more upper division courses where you're more in charge of your own understanding and learning process. This is also exceptionally true for online classes where you might be doing a lot of the learning on your own. So I want to start with a question. What do you do when you're assigned a reading for a class? If you're like me, for the majority of your undergraduate career, you didn't do it. Or maybe you skimmed it but didn't really deep dive into it. And although it may not make or break your grade, it can really impact your ability to understand and comprehend the information that you're being taught. So what we want to do when we are assigned a reading is take some time and actually figure out, how does it help? How can I embrace this reading? And the big thing is that the readings that you're assigned are there to help you acquire knowledge, to help you develop a deeper understanding of the material, and to introduce you to new terms and ideas. This also gives you a chance to gain more exposure to the class material. So you can get ideas for some major assignments or projects that you might have, and it's a good chance to practice those critical thinking and processing skills for the information. This is exceptionally true if you have a class that's going through material really quickly, where maybe you don't have a chance to cover everything in a lecture. So you want to take a second and figure out, what is the purpose of the reading that I've been given? Now, if it's due before class, this is usually an opportunity for an instructor to introduce ideas, concepts, and formulas. That way you feel more comfortable with them when they're brought up again in class. What this does is really ground the lectures. So if students have some familiarity before they come in, it's a lot easier to explain that information and to cover more of it in depth. What it does basically is allow you to gain the basics of the class material. Now, if you're doing a reading after class, maybe an instructor says like, hey, cover this or read this now that you've finished the lecture. It's usually going to help you clarify concepts and help you get those connections in the lecture material. This also helps to reinforce the class time that you spent on those concepts. Now, before you start doing any sort of reading, you want to take a sec and preview the material and kind of get a sense of what actually is going on. So when we just sit down and read blindly, just like start to finish, go for it, sometimes we don't have any sort of purpose that we're reading with. So skimming what the section titles are, looking at the table of contents, the chapter summaries, those sorts of things, gives us sort of a preview of what we're actually going to be diving into. Read critically the preface or introduction, because that'll help you understand what the following text is actually about. And as you're doing this sort of previewing, you want to develop some questions about the material, and these can be general or specific. But the point of them is to give you a purpose and some direction as you read. So if you read one of the chapter summaries and there's a lot of terms in there that don't make sense, then your purpose for that reading is to figure out what those terms are and better understand them. If there's some connections to other lecture material that aren't very clear, then your question may be, well, how is this all connected? And as you read, you can be searching for those links. When you're actually reading, you want to make sure that you're engaging with the text. And that means a lot of different things. But some basics are, mark up the text. If you bought that textbook, write in it. Underline or highlight definitions, examples, and connections. You want to really draw attention to the things that stick out or seem important. Put a box around formulas or main ideas and star key concepts. And then take some notes while you're reading. This is especially helpful with super dense material, right? Like let's say you're reading a scientific article on evolutionary theory. It might be really complicated. So just taking some skeleton outline notes for yourself is going to help you process it a lot better. And these notes can be on, your notebook paper, or get a pad of sticky notes and annotate it as you go. Now, when it comes to highlighting, you want to be careful. because oftentimes we'll start to highlight as we read and everything seems really important and really critical, but you end up with an entire paragraph in yellow and then it's really hard to figure out what exactly is important. So when it comes to highlighting, read the entire section first, then go back and just highlight the things that are important or your main topic, right? So you want to make sure that whatever sort of marking up system that you're using for those readings is actually helpful to you, because just reading your textbook in yellow doesn't help any more than reading it without that highlighting. You also want to read with focus, and that's to help clarify confusing material. So no shame in rereading anything that was confusing. I've read certain paragraphs 7+ times just because they didn't make sense the first 6 times. As you're reading that, you want to write down any questions that are popping up so that you have a more guided direction to look for answers. And then look up definitions, whether that's in the glossary, the footnotes, Wikipedia, anything that you need. Use those supplemental sources to help you better understand what's being told to you. And all of this goes to just building a foundation of knowledge in the material that you're covering. Now we're going to talk about sort of developing a system for your reading, and this might be something that you're already doing subconsciously, but we're just going to be a little more mindful and upfront about it. So when it comes to developing a system, you want to think about what it is that you're trying to get out. So we already talked about, developing some questions or figuring out the reason for the material. So that's number one. Next, you want to figure out what sort of symbols or highlighting you're going to use, and you want to keep it kind of minimal. You don't want too many things that get suddenly really confusing in the material that you're covering. And you can always adjust this system depending on the text that you're reading, because what works for a math class might not work for a literature class. So figure out what works best there. So in this example, you can see that this person chose to star any sort of thesis statement. They're going to use yellow highlights for the terms or key details, and then they're going to annotate in this fashion for information that was covered in class so they can make those connections. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is really adaptable. So if your textbook has, say, like a list of key terms at the start of the chapter, then you probably don't also need to highlight all of them throughout the text as you read. So figuring out what makes sense for each class is really critical here. Now you've got your system, you've done the reading, you've taken the notes, you've dove through all of that, you've reread some things. What do you do after the reading? Do you just set it aside? Are you done with it? Maybe. Or you can spend a little more time with it to more actively engage and use it as a really good study tool. And you can do this by writing a summary up of it, right? If you just read a chapter's worth of a biology textbook, create a little summary for yourself. Whether it's just a couple quick bullet points or a short little paragraph, find some way to synthesize that information. Also, try creating some questions and seeing if you can answer them easily as a way to check your understanding. Again, reread anything really important. This is more useful when you're getting close to a test, but if you mark out hey, this is a critical section, later when you're studying, you can go back to it and reread it. You want to make sure that you're identifying where any of the emphasis is placed and including that in your summary so you know what's really important there. And then if you took any notes in the margin, just rewrite those into a notebook. That way you have them all in one spot and easy to find later. Finally, discuss that material, whether that's connecting with a professor or TA to get some clarification on questions that you had or any points of confusion, or maybe summarizing the material to someone unfamiliar with the text. So annoy your roommate. Ask them if you can give them a quick summary of what you just read, because sometimes hearing it out loud for yourself makes it all a little bit clearer. And then turn to your peers for added clarification, whether that's drop-in tutoring or SIPass. If there was anything within that material that left you with questions, get them answered. Don't just let them linger. And additionally, you can reread with supplemental sources. So we kind of discussed using a glossary or dictionary or Wikipedia, but include things like YouTube. Maybe readings don't allow you to gain the information as well. I fully understand that. Trying to find someone discussing that material, giving a summary of it, the Cliff Notes version of it, maybe there's a YouTube video. Finding that can help you better understand that reading as well. And then you can also look for supplemental readings. So, if you're in a literature class, an example of that might be beginning theory, an introduction to literacy and cultural theory, right? So when I look for supplemental readings, I look to see what it was that was cited by what I just read. So if you're reading a scientific article and they keep mentioning another specific article, check that one out. It'll probably give you a lot more background information and help make any sort of analysis that they made a little bit clearer. So we often think of critical reading as just those textbooks or articles that were given, but there's another side to that, and that's critically reading assignment prompts. And this is really helpful when you're trying to figure out what it is that you're supposed to do for a class. So whenever you're given an assignment prompt for a large project or an essay or even just a simple homework assignment, make sure you read it right away and read it completely. You want to seek out, any key points or requirements, and you want to figure out what questions you might have on that assignment. You want to break it down. Figure out the background information that maybe contextualizes the task that you're being asked to do. So let's say you're in a philosophy class and you're being asked to critically analyze Kant. You want to make sure that you've already read any of the readings that you were given on that, return to those lecture notes, and make sure you know all of the background stuff. And then figure out what it is you're being asked to do. Is it writing a critical analysis essay? Is it finding supplemental sources? Figure out what your professor wants. And then determine the technical guidelines. These are things like due dates, expected length, style guidelines. So usually in high school, everyone uses MLA, but when you get to college, it's a lot of different citing and like reference type guidelines. So maybe you're using MLA in your English class, but you're using APA in a journalism class, and you're using Chicago style in a history class. Make sure you understand what type of format you need to do your assignment in. And then just some other additional questions to consider. Are there any guiding questions that should be included in the assignment? Within that prompt, do they say like, answer what was happening in this time period, or contextualize this decision based on what was occurring, in foreign policy land, or something like that. Figure out if there's any specific points you need to hit. And then also figure out what the point of the assignment is. Is it to help you understand a particular topic better? Is it to challenge your analysis skills? Is it to help you practice certain concepts? Why are you being assigned this? And then if you aren't given a specific style that you need to do the assignment is, try and figure out if there's maybe a style that's really prevalent in your field that you could incorporate into your assignment. So this is true for lab reports, right? Maybe you're in a microbiology class and they don't have really any specific style that you need to use exactly, but maybe there's something that's really common in the field that you could incorporate and get some practice on that. So critical reading is maybe not the sexiest of topics to discuss, but it's really important. And all of these readings really help you build that more deep and intense knowledge of the courses that you're in. So if you want to go beyond just the surface, really dive into them, really go into those readings and try and gain as much extra information as you can. So with that, I hope you all have a really great day. Keep reading, keep analyzing all of the stuff that you're given for your classes, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.